Javi. So happy to be chatting with you today and learning more about your expertise around privacy. We're part of a global community of, I guess you can call us young leaders, movers and shakers. And most recently, Javi has been supporting us at Bowhead, advising us on privacy and our strategy around privacy specifically. So very happy to be chatting with you to learn more about your thoughts around privacy and the future of privacy post-COVID. And so let's just jump into it.
It's interesting because, my career began very far away from healthcare, even though most of my family are medical practitioners. My parents are doctors and have nurses and pharmacists. So I was kind of the first person in my family to study engineering and business and just go completely far away. But eventually I started working more and more on this issue of privacy. And then I realized that there are two elements that we are often overlooking. First of all, is that people with health conditions of any kind are the most vulnerable, among the most vulnerable in our society. And therefore, I think there's a duty to protect that many product designers and engineers don't really see that much. And that's one of the reasons why I started digging into that space. The other is actually that as a result of the way we are incorporating technology into our lives, mental health and addiction and things like this have been a bigger and bigger and bigger issue. And I think are going to be bigger issues in the decades to come.
We're also entering, I guess one can argue that we're also entering the age of surveillance. We know that, China's already been, tracking their people, and with Korea in contact tracing, we know that surveillance is upon us. And so I'm curious to know from you, how do you react to this? Do you worry about this? Do you think that people, humans, the citizens are actually worried about this?
There are two main problems with all of this, even three. One of them is obviously depends on where you live. Your government may be more respectful or less respectful with your rights. So for example, in China, you see this new credit system by which you're rated by your neighbors, by your local authorities on how good a citizen you are. And based on that, you can access credit or not, you can buy a high-speed ticket or not. But beyond that, also, we're giving our data, willingly or not, to a lot of entities, companies, governments, and protecting that data is actually very hard. So right now, we're at a point where it's really hard to know who has our information. And even those who got it in the first place lost track of it because information is sold, information is transferred. You visit a website, there may be like 60 companies behind there trying to extract different data points. And it's really hard to know where all that goes. So I find it really worrisome. I'm optimistic on the other hand, but I feel that optimism has to be grounded on a layer of realism.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, as you said, technology has been tracking people, for a very long time. And, whatever you Google, all that information, I think thanks to Cambridge Analytica, a lot of that truth was exposed to the public. So from a user perspective, do you feel like people are worried?
So this debate is very interesting because if you go back 100 years, a bit more than 100 years, when the first camera was introduced, where Eastman Kodak introduced the first just personal camera in 1888, the conversation that was happening through the newspapers and people is very similar to the conversation today. There's a big debate on privacy, like people could snap a photo of you and that would like violate your personal space. So a lot of the arguments that you hear today are not new. They've been around for a very, very long time. The difference now is that data is not tangible. It's not like a physical photograph that someone takes of you. So it's very hard to understand what kind of things can be done with data. When is that data being extracted or learned from you? And therefore, I think it's very hard for people to grasp the importance and the magnitude of the problem until something happens. When people suddenly realize that their health insurance or their car insurance is more expensive because there's data about them that tells them they're a bad driver. Or, for example, when suddenly they see their bank account depleted because someone just took their social security number and their photo, and they were able to get a loan in their bank, supplanting them, then their life is shattered. And it's at that moment people start caring, and it happens way more often than we believe. I think that once people start seeing the consequences, it's like a flip. It's like something switch happens. Until you see it, because data is so invisible, it's very hard for most people to actually understand importance.
Yeah, yeah, and in the health data privacy context, looking at 23andMe as an example, there's more and more very very valuable data that we're starting to track and test. And so it's going to get quite interesting. I think that people already don't understand how many health data security breaches there are on an annual basis. There are several, and these are large scale. So as you said, I think once these start to become more exposed in terms of these hacks and these vulnerabilities, people will start to talk about them. And the hope is that we'll have processes in place to be able to support people that are supporting privacy and the de-identification of data and patient rights or human rights. Let's switch to your role as a product designer. I'm curious to know how the privacy debate over the last decade has really shaped your philosophy and process.
I think, well, there's one thing that's clear. Like whenever you do user research, whenever you go into you're starting to understand the users, you realize very quickly that if privacy and convenience are in the same place, always convenience trumps privacy. So if you give a user a choice, they're naturally going to go towards the more convenient one. So as a designer, I think it's been an interesting process to learn how to design products that actually protect users' privacy, but also offer a user experience that is equivalent, if not better, than one that does. And I think that's one of the main challenges. At the same time, one of the most fascinating issues to tackle, because once you arrive at that point where you're offering a similar product and you're able to build on top of that and say, well, actually, this product is private by design, it's protecting you, users really get that as a differentiator. And I believe that we as product designers or as consumer companies, also enterprise, have an edge when we're able to say that our product has the user in mind and actually has been designed with their privacy in mind. As a designer, that has evolved, because originally my philosophy was, empathy driven. So really understand the user, what they want, and trying to give a product that answers their needs. But then eventually I kind of moved more towards the Apple thesis, in which you actually have the user, you have empathy with the user, but you realize that the user still doesn't know some of the things that they want yet. So you need to actually give them a little bit more than what they want until they realize that they want it. So with privacy is like that. You actually need to go one step forward. And even if the user is not demanding that your product follow certain standards when it comes to privacy, you actually have to do it and then educate the user about why is that important. And I think it's a beautiful journey, but also it takes a bit of time and experience to get to that point.
Yeah, it's quite the expertise that you have, because just thinking about our app and our journey with Better, it's been a constant challenge to be able to find that balance between making sure that we're conveying our needs to be incredibly private and practice consensual data sharing, et cetera, but also maintain user experience and make it really fun and exciting and motivating, because we know that there's thousands of apps available. So now we're playing in the app game, and so it's been quite the journey, and we're very grateful actually for your expertise and your thoughts in allowing us to kind of find that sweet spot. On the topic of startups, I'm curious to know, given this new data privacy context, do you think that small firms or startups have an edge over some of the more established players?
I think they do in some aspects. In other aspects, we as entrepreneurs, we're holding the short end of the stick. So we're lucky because we can design the product from scratch most of the time. So when you have these requirements in mind, and when you have these constraints present when you're designing the product, you can definitely build something that is solid from the ground up when you think about privacy. If you are a bigger company, you have legacy products, you need to maintain a lot of things that were created before this whole thing was a concern, then it's very costly to actually transition towards that. And also, if you have a culture where privacy or simply user needs mindset is not there, implementing that, changing that, it's very, well, takes a lot of effort. On the other hand, I think it's expensive. It's expensive to do certain things. Like whenever you hold data, you need to hold it securely, and securing those servers or securing those processes, it's very expensive. You need to hire a lot of talent that is not cheap. When you need to comply with regulations around the world, well, you need lawyers and a legal team, because these are not easy to follow regulations. So it's complicated when you're a small guy and you need to prioritize. You need to hire 10 people, 20 people, 50 people. You need to choose how do you allocate those resources. Well, the whole privacy debate, and you really want to do things the right way, means that a lot of that personnel, a lot of that expense has to go towards areas that are less flashy. There may be less features or less design, because you need to put those resources in security or in communication to educate your users. Bigger company has more resources, and obviously they can deploy bigger teams to tackle these challenges.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I hope that, you know, there's a lot more collaboration that's born in this space. So the hope is that more people will start to work together, and also some of the established players will start to look at the startups as allies and collaborators. So let's talk about health data, because, you know, this obviously, you know, we're in the thick of this pandemic. How do you see the health data space or health data privacy space evolving post-COVID, and how does some of the debate around the national data surveillance kind of conflict or interact with some of these health data privacy policies that we know about, that you've been helping us with as well, GDPR, HIPAA?
So no one doubts that, well, data is a fantastic opportunity to actually bring healthcare to more people, make healthcare more affordable. Health data is, poses two challenges. First of all is that it's necessary. So if the moment you start digitizing a lot of these processes, the moment you actually start giving users the opportunity of moving from one doctor to another and carry their own medical history, I think you just start generating a lot of sensitive data. The downside of that is that when you look at a data record and how much a data record is worth in the black market, you realize that like a file on a person that has their address, maybe a credit card or two, is worth $150. A file that has healthcare data is worth $400. What happens when your health data is exposed to a potential employer, you're going through an interview, or when that health data is used for police profiling or certain things like this, then it's even more tricky. It becomes a very challenging debate from a pure civil rights perspective.
If you want to get super dark, genetic cloning.
Yes, I try not to think of things, but actually it happens. I think in this case, legislation is important, because things don't self-regulate normally when it comes to complicated matters like this. And I believe there's been a continuous effort the last 15, 20 years to understand what this whole problem is, and an honest effort from legislators to put forward norms that try to level the playing field and make it easier for citizens to have access to knowledge about where the data is going. Now, those efforts are uneven. You have things like HIPAA in the US, which has been around for quite a while, specific for healthcare data. You have HIPAA in Canada. GDPR probably in Europe is the latest and greatest. They really pushed a big effort, because the challenge with this legislation is that in general, it's all pretty comprehensive, and it's actually helpful. If you actually read the laws, that the kind of mandate that they give to the companies is very reasonable. A lot of the things they encourage are things that a company should be doing anyways. But if there are no penalties to comply, then no one does it. So I think if the US, you can pay $70,000 fine, $100,000 fine. In Canada, the same, and you get away with it. Thankfully, with GDPR, that's different. So it's a tricky line, it's a tricky balance. But ultimately, I think there needs to be more public-private collaboration. There should be more understanding of the role of the regulator for private companies, and also there should be more closeness with the business and the real world from the regulator side. And normally legislation goes 2, 3, 5 years behind business, and that's normal and that's fine. And we need to learn how to live with each other and try to understand the role of each other, and at the end build things that are good for the citizens. And I think that's a common interest of everyone, because business models can be built on top of that, and successful companies can be built on top of that.
Yeah. And on that note, what is your vision for healthcare? Where do you see the future of healthcare going? And what does it look like for you?
I think I'm a realistic optimist. I think digitalization and using new tools and AI, machine learning, these things are positive for the patient. I think they're going to improve our quality of life overall in the next 20, 30 years, even sooner. However, these constraints happen, and unfortunately with healthcare and health data, I think we're gonna go through a few big scares, if not worse, till we realize how important it is to protect it. And it's hard to predict. I think it's gonna open a lot of opportunity for new players, and Bowhead and better among them, to harness these new tools and actually improve people's experience. And I really believe that there are opportunities for building business models that are privacy mindful, and that are successful, that are profitable, and that they don't toy with risky things like people's health and people's privacy and what may happen with that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited about the developments in healthcare around patient power, just giving and really understanding that, because there's, so much to discuss and debate about, whether how much ownership do we give to patients, and is there such thing as co-ownership with, hospitals and patients and government, and, it's just a really interesting topic, and there's still so much to learn, but we're really happy to be playing a role and supporting patient sovereignty to a certain extent. So thank you so much for sharing your vision. Thank you so much for tuning in and learning with us. I hope you found this interview with Javi useful. There's a lot more interviews to come with bright minds and thought leaders in the space of data privacy and patient-centric healthcare. So please, if you'd like to connect with us, ask more questions, just follow along our journey, you can visit us at our website. We'll place the link here below, or email us at support@bowheadhealth.com.